So as people are rolling in more and more, again, my name is Taylor and I'm going to be emceeing today. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you guys. As we're waiting for everyone to get all settled in, I'm going to read our wonderful, wonderful presenter's bio just so we can get a little bit of an idea of who we're talking with. So this is Swathi Shanmuksandaram. Swathi is a 25-year-old law graduate, Indian-born migrant, and proud Tamil woman from Melbourne, Australia, who advocates for the promotion of mental health literacy in refugee and migrant communities. Swathi currently leads the Vermilion Project, where she fuses her love for both law, advocacy, and community to promote the economic and social participation of people affected by mental health conditions and visible illnesses. She was recognized as well as the Young Social Pioneer by the Foundation for Young Australians, the Create Change Fellow at Democracy in Colour, Global Shaper, which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum, and is the Victorian State Representative for the Youth Advocacy Network to MYAN Australia. She currently balances all of that while working in the not-for-profits and legal sectors in Melbourne. Awesome, so we're great to get started now. I'm going to pass this off to our wonderful, wonderful presenter, Swathi. I'm going to turn off my mic and camera so you can get started. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone part of the Jack.org team and all of who I'm sure are incredible young people tuning in today. I have been really excited to do this for a long time. One, because it wasn't long ago that I was preparing to pack my bags and get on board a plane to get to the Jack.org summit that was scheduled to happen. But of course it didn't, because the borders closed and we're living in these really strange times of coronavirus at the moment. But of course, it's absolutely amazing that we're able to meet virtually. So it's lovely to meet all of you. The other reason I'm excited to do this is because I get to say that I come to you literally from the future, because I'm sitting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm, otherwise known as Melbourne, Australia, where it is currently 9 a.m. on Tuesday, and you guys are on Monday night. So I think that's so cool. And it was May the 4th as well. So there's some really funky things to be had there. So today's talk, exactly, time travel. Now, the topic of today's talk, I suppose, is diversity and inclusion, as was introduced in a really lovely way. And while a lot of you may not know who I am besides that introduction, I thought I would speak to you from the perspective as a young person who has just now come out of navigating what I like to call quite a spectacular quarter-life crisis. So now being 25 and going to be sort of out of that youth category, I thought it would be really interesting to share with you what my experiences with diversity and inclusion are in terms of advocacy and advocating in the space of youth mental health. And what it's always, how the definition of what it means to be diverse and inclusive really evolved for me over time. And I think now more than ever, it's really important to be having these conversations because, like I said, we're living in these strange, scary times of coronavirus where all of a sudden we're isolated to our homes, and we're also seeing these spikes in racism being directed towards certain members of our population, and specifically people who are of Asian appearance. And we are seeing these scenes on the news and across the world of people being called out on the street, on the shops, for nothing more than looking of Asian appearance, because there's, of course, this really negative sentiment going around at the moment about the coronavirus and the cause of it and who's responsible for it. And it's really painful to see things like that happen, because it takes me back to my first experiences with racism as a child. So I'm Indian born. I was born on the lands of Manargudi in Tamil Nadu in India. So to all of, if anyone speaks Tamil out there who's watching, அனைவருக்கும் அன்புள்ள வணக்கங்கள். But so I was born in Manargudi, and my parents we came to Australia in a time where in the areas that we lived, there weren't a lot of people of colour. And I remember my parents going back and describing those times to me and saying that they would be really, really excited and jump with excitement as soon as they saw a person of colour. Like, it doesn't matter what colour they were, as long as they were of some colour, they would just get really, really excited. But it's a really interesting time, and a lot of the talk of racism and seeing these incidents really takes me back, because I remember what it was like to be different and be the only person of colour in what was a really, really white environment. And it was a very scary thing, first of all. So I didn't speak English, and had a really thick accent, obviously looked very, very different to all of the school kids that I was going to school with. And we had to live through these really interesting and difficult times where I used to get spat on just for looking differently. People would make fun of my very, very long last name, as you can see. And it was really difficult to navigate any sort of spaces like school, home life, just going to the store every day or playing with my friends at school. And instances like that are really, really strong instances, like being spat on just for the way you look, evoke really powerful memories for me at this time. And so I think it's important that we're talking about what role race plays in any advocacy work or any sort of support or development work that we're doing, because no matter what, identity plays a role in everything. And for me, the evolution of identity carries so much and means so much to me now, as someone who's come out of a quarter life crisis, that I think it's really, really important to touch on even in the beginning. So coming from those times of feeling and looking really, really different, there were a lot of times in my life from my childhood that I don't remember quite well, but I remember being in and out of different healthcare systems, because I also care for a family member with a mental illness, and knowing what it felt like to be treated differently. Even going to the doctor or going to the hospital when someone was sick were very different experiences, because I could very obviously feel it's almost a visceral experience where that you're being looked at differently, or there were just a lot of assumptions made, like I couldn't speak English, or that we didn't know what was going on, or we were rorting a system that was there and meant to help us. So as a child, as a first-gen migrant with parents who didn't quite know how to navigate a lot of those systems, it's really, really difficult as a child growing up in this new environment where you don't know the language, everyone looks different to you, you're not really meant to be there, and all of a sudden you're also expected to support your family through all of these complex systems. And it really hit home to me about what it meant to be an advocate. You see, because growing up, I would see the word advocate a lot around my hometown when I was growing up in India, because, of course, advocates are also known as lawyers in other jurisdictions. And being from a South Asian family and a proudly traditional Tamil family, being a doctor or lawyer was a very linear career path that I was very much forced into. And growing up, I think having those experiences of feeling really different, having to fight to be recognised and be treated well and properly in all of these different systems, in some shape or form directed me to be really passionate about speaking about what it means to advocate for someone else, about what it means to argue, about what it means to call something out and be really strong in speaking about something, that I kind of naturally went, okay, I don't want to be a doctor, so I'm going to be a lawyer. And it was being trained as a lawyer was such an interesting experience, because I don't think once I got into formal education, I don't think I ever really felt so different or looked so different until I started working, and I fell into the human rights law space, working with a lot of people, refugees and asylum seekers who are coming to Australia to seek protection. And of course, it's a really interesting time to talk about migration as well, because we're currently in this pandemic, and I feel like the majority of us are really experiencing what it feels like to be absolutely terrified of where you live, and to want to or feel the need to move, to leave everything and move somewhere because you're terrified of something that you have no control over whatsoever. So working in the human rights law space, I worked with a lot of victims of torture and trauma, and really got to see the different ways that we treat people who look different, speak differently, and who come from those vulnerable cohorts. And of course, a lot of those people were people affected by mental illness, and who had very poor mental health outcomes as a result of a lot of the things that they've been through. And I, for me, was able to carry a lot of the lived experiences that I had as a child in caring for someone with a mental illness through me in my work and in the way that I worked with the clients that presented to me, particularly ones who had experiences of sexual violence or physical violence. Of course, what really made me happy to do all of this work and carried me through it, even though there is a lot of pain and then there is a lot of ugliness when you're doing that sort of work, when you're working so close to these manifestations of pain, of trauma, of differences that come to the surface for someone, I was really able to go back and dig into the way that I felt growing up, the way that I felt when I was looked at differently, the way that I felt when I was spoken about differently, and really pour all of that pain, that love into translating into how can I help this person and how can I invest in you the knowledge that I have to make sure that you have a better life. So I was really lucky to be able to do that for a number of years. And then I hit the end of my university journey and kind of had a quarter life crisis because I was like, I really love helping people and I really love doing what I do, but I don't know ultimately if this is the way that I want to help people and if this is the way that I want to be an advocate. And the huge reason for that is because when I was 18 years old, that was really the first time that I really came to have any sort of understanding of or knowledge of what it means to care for someone with a mental illness. You see, throughout my whole life, knowingly and unknowingly, I'd been exposed to mental illness and different systems and going in and out of hospital with a family member, but I never actually knew that they suffered from a mental illness, which sounds really crazy, but when you're from a South Asian family where mental illness and mental health literacy is very, very poor, it's actually quite a normal thing. Like I hear about this happening a lot. And the way that it happened for me was that I was in year 12, which of course is your pivotal year of high school where you're just preparing to go to uni. There's a lot of academic pressure to perform really, really well. And inevitably, I think I started cracking and decided that something needed to change because I was really struggling through that year and I needed help. So I was able to reach out to some of the support staff at my high school, thankfully, because I was able to do that in that environment and say, I think I need to talk to someone because I'm really struggling with a lot of the things that I'm going through this year. And I'm really struggling with some things that are happening at home, which I didn't realize were affecting me. And I sat down with a high school counsellor who pulled together or had all of this information on me, and I found it really confusing because I had no idea where this had all come from. I didn't get why there was this massive file on me, and she opened it up and looked at me and said, you know, we kind of had a feeling that you might be going through a tough time. Because as you know, so, this person in your family has this mental illness, they're schizophrenic. And I remember being incredibly shocked that time because it was the first time I'd really had someone talk to me quite seriously about mental illness. And it was the first time I'd ever heard the word schizophrenia, the term. And my entire world came crashing down like a pile of bricks. And it was the first time I really, really felt what it meant to feel very small, very different, and very left out of a system that was meant to protect me all along. And what I mean by that is for so long in my life, I'd had medical professionals come in and out of my life. So many people obviously work with my family, but no one actually thought to sit down and talk to the kids, the young people, about what sort of impact that was going to have on them and what it meant to grow up with a family member with a mental illness. So there was a lot of anger, a lot of pain there, and it was really when I started my journey with understanding what it meant to work with a population that is diverse and how to be inclusive in the work that we do. So that set me on a path to kind of a lot of self-discovery, a lot of quarter-life crisis events, which involved a lot of searching and soul searching and self-discovery. And I was lucky, really, really lucky to fall into some different youth programs that kind of harness the passions and the kind of the joys that I took out of advocacy work that I was trained to do as a lawyer, and channel it into working with other young people like me who are from what you call vulnerable cohorts or refugee and migrant cohorts, to talk about and tease out exactly what the unspeakable experiences are that you've had, and actually put words to those different feelings that you might not have been able to before. So I ended up falling into these youth volunteer programs at a centre called the Centre for Multicultural Youth here in Melbourne in Victoria. And it was the first safe space that I'd had because I was working with a group that was entirely refugee and migrant young people, who just understood the pains and the different things that I found to be unspeakable. I was given a safe space and the opportunity to say that mental health was one of the things that terrified me, that really impacted my life in every which way. And I was given the opportunity to develop a solution. They asked me, what do I think we need to do to help other young people like me? So I was given the incredible space and opportunity to work with these young people to craft a solution, and came up with this idea that we wanted to create this youth mental health outreach program where we put young people like me in high schools to talk to kids and hopefully give them a bridge to help them reach out and get help or talk to their families about mental illness in ways that we wouldn't have able to even experience before. And quite interestingly, that idea was backed by this organisation, and it's now this fully born idea that's actually been funded, and is where trained young speakers who are going to go out and talk to young people in high schools. And the most important thing is that they're a really, really diverse cohort where we put lived experience at the heart of everything. And I tell this story not just because it's just this small little volunteer thing that I did that turned into an idea, but it was because it was the first time that I had really felt included in a decision-making process as a young person, as a migrant, as a young carer, as someone with all of those different lived experiences. And I was taken on that journey from identifying a problem, talking about a solution, and then actually putting all of those thoughts into action. And not only that, but to go have an organisation go a step further and say, we're going to put money behind you and we're going to support you to make this idea a reality. So having all of those lived experiences embedded into that idea, and to now see it me now as a soon-to-be former young person is incredible, because for me, it's really a 25-year journey to come here and speak to you all about something like this, about mental health, about mental illness in my community. And I'm aware that I've gone on for a while, so I'll try to finish up very quickly. But the reason this is a really, really important moment to me, and why I think it's so special, and why I think it's really a shining example to me of what it means to do great great youth engagement that is culturally aware, is because what I realized was that it took me about probably 24 years, 23 years to see any sort of meaningful inclusion where young people who looked like me, who had the experiences that I had, were invited to the table and to be part of that conversation. And so to see someone listen to your ideas and see that become something real was actually something that really evoked so much emotion into me. And I really, even now, I get quite teary about it. And now the really incredible thing is that I actually work for that organisation. So I went through there as a young person, went through this process of real personal growth and development. And now I work there and I get to do incredible things like this and be supported to do incredible things like this, where I get to share my experiences of all of the different things that I've been through, and to hopefully help other young people like me to uplift themselves and to help themselves when it comes to mental health and mental illness. So I suppose what I want everyone to take from that is that the greatest lessons that I've learned are, one, don't ever be afraid of your story. A really, really incredible woman here in Australia, her name's Jerry Pletos, who runs a publication called Kara Zebda Press, told me that your story is everything. And if you're a person of colour or a person who has experienced disadvantage in your life, it's very easy for other people to take up the space that you feel like you should occupy. So when you feel like you are in a state where you feel safe enough to talk about something that scares you, where you feel like you've worked through a lot of the problems for things that terrify you, take up as much space as you can in spaces that have usually terrified you. And for me, one of those things is this. I would have never expected to speak in an online space about mental illness, but I've done it. If that means going to some sort of government body, if it means going to your school and talking about mental illness, do it. Do whatever terrifies you the most. And the other thing that I think is really, really important is to always check yourself and check the position that you have, the privilege that you have in comparison to any of the other people in your room. When you walk into the room, make sure you're aware of who's there, who am I speaking to, what message do I want to send, and do everything you can to make that message accessible. And if you don't know how to do it, diversity and inclusion is all about an ongoing process of learning. Nobody's perfect at it, nobody's good at it, but all you need to do is be willing to learn, be willing to listen to those people with lived experiences, and most of all, take as many people as you can with you. And I'm sure that's what's happening, and that's why this virtual event is happening, to connect all of these really, really incredible young leaders from around the world. So I found it a huge, huge honor to be able to speak to you today. I know you're giving up a considerable amount of time just to listen to me, so I take that really, really seriously. And yeah, I hope that you will raise your voice and take up as much space as you need to.
Thank you so much, Swathi, on behalf of everyone listening here today. I know that really hit home for me, and I know that was so inspirational for everyone to hear. Thank you for having the courage to tell your own story and to inspire us to not be afraid of our own stories. I know that's been a journey for me as well. Yeah, thank you so much. It really, really, I really love what you said about not being afraid of our own stories, and also taking up room when you deserve it, but also checking and bringing people along with you. For me, specifically being a person of mixed race, and my family coming from a place of Japanese internment, I carry those stories with me with everything I do, but I also recognize that I'm a fairly white presenting person, so there is a large amount of privilege that comes with it. So that is something that I've really explored myself for a long time, and it's still a journey I'm on. But hearing from you is really, really incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got a question here from Alexandra Radu, and she says, what are your tips to make yourself heard by people in power? How do you make your way there, and how do you bring up the issue so that they consider it? How should you do the follow-up with that person? Thanks in advance.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing question. And I think that one thing I always like to start with is be really clear on what your message is. Like, do you know what you want to say? If you say, I'm really, really passionate about mental health, I'm really, really passionate about mental illness, that's a great thing. But remember that people in power are also time poor people, and also respect the amount of time that you have for yourself in your life. Because I think often with young people and youth advocacy work, a lot of people just assume that young people have all this time in the world, that they don't do anything else with their lives, that they don't have school, that they don't have priorities. You absolutely have priorities. And remember that your time is just as valuable as someone in a position of power. So in saying that, make sure you check in with yourself for a mutual process of respect. Respect their time, respect your own time, and respect what you want to say by being really, really clear on that message. So, for example, for me, most of the time, I don't think that children of families from refugee and migrant backgrounds are included in conversations around mental health care enough. And when I go up to a decision maker, even if it's 5 minutes of their time, like it's a handshake, if it's a meeting that you've requested with them specifically, be as specific as you can about that message. And then as soon as you get in the door, get straight to it. You don't need to do a spiel. You don't need to make it pretty. You're this amazing young person. Just go in and tell them what you want to tell them. And how do you make your way there, and how do you bring up the issue is also a really important question. And again, that comes down to having some sort of an understanding and being able to engage with either government processes, political processes, or even just different advocacy processes. And I think that one of the really, really interesting things about advocacy is people can think it's really complicated and that leadership is really complicated, that there's this big formal path you need to take. There isn't, because leadership comes in so many forms and advocacy looks different in so many different ways. And being a leader can be something as simple as speaking up to someone in a healthcare setting or speaking up to someone on the street if there's an instance of racism or someone's calling someone out. So leadership looks different in lots of different ways. And if it's something that scares you and you think you're not quite at the stage to go up to that person in a position of power, start small and be proud of yourself, congratulate yourself for every little small victory that you have. And in terms of follow-up, do everything that you can. Like, I'm all for flooding people's inboxes, calling people, writing about them on Facebook, tweeting them. Twitter is a very powerful tool for young advocates. I used to not like Twitter, but just get on Twitter. Like, you have just... You got to do it. But I've actually had quite a bit of success with following up with people by tweeting them and being like, I don't think you talked enough about this when you said this.
For sure.
Yeah.
Liked what you said about like making sure that your message is clear, because like when it comes to mental health, these are like complex issues and complex policies that we're talking about. So that's one thing that we do address at Jack.org, and we'll be talking more about that in our collab sessions. Look forward to it. But we talk about having an elevator pitch. Like if you run into like this specific policy maker in an elevator, having exactly what you need to say all ready to go right in that length of an elevator ride. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Also, one of the questions that us as network representatives have been talking about a lot lately is the power that stories have, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but also the fallbacks that can happen. The idea of tokenism and only telling these stories when it's, convenient for a person.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Do you have any advice or takeaways from your experiences and learnings about avoiding tokenism in our environments, organizations, and storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because as a young person who was the subject of programs where you get invited to things to speak at, you kind of go through this process of sometimes realizing I'm literally the only person of color in this room, or I'm literally the only person with this experience in the room. And oftentimes with diversity and inclusion, people see it on the surface level as people of color, and they forget about the intersectionality, the intersectionalism of it. They forget about disability. They forget about different gender identities. They forget about a lot of different things. So in terms of trying to avoid tokenism, I think it's a really long process of self-awareness and developing a strong sense of one, self-respect, but also self-advocacy. Mm-hmm. And I always now being in a position to work with young people where I'm sending young people out to different opportunities, or I'm working with young people to help them build those self-advocacy tools. One of the things I really emphasize is being able to, is that you get this gut feeling when something's not quite right. And so a lot of people describe this when they talk about instances where they're scared, or if people are like, how do you know when something's a bit racist or when something's a bit wrong? And the answer sometimes usually just feels a bit wrong. And what I usually say is that if you get that feeling that something feels a bit wrong, then tell someone you trust. And I think when you're just starting out, or you're not quite at the stage where you're super, super confident and there and you're just able to go out and do things for yourself, it's so absolutely fine to talk to that support person, someone in an organization, a parent, a friend, someone you trust, and say, not quite sure that this is really what they're going for. Develop a response or an ask. You don't need to give up the opportunity. So you can say, you've invited me to speak. Do you think that you could also invite someone else so that we can make this panel a little bit more diverse? Or, hey, you've given me this opportunity. Why don't you give me 5 more minutes so that I can talk about X, Y, and Z and really carry my message through? There are so many different ways that you can do that, but I think it really starts with a process of self-advocacy and having the people, your mentors and the people around you really support that message of how can I make meaningful inclusion happen?
Yeah, taking these opportunities that you have that, maybe they are an example of tokenism, but doing what you can to shape that and make a meaningful difference, however you can in that situation. I think that's wonderful. We've got a question here from Karen Chen, who says, "Hi, Swathi. Thank you so much for this amazing speech. What advice do you have to build the confidence to take up space in places where no one else looks like you?"
It's a terrifying experience, and I can speak from personal experience. Sometimes I've gone to events or I've ended up somewhere and I feel like some people tend to do this, but sometimes I scan the room just to see how many different people are there. And I have been in a few instances where there's been literally no one, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm just going to talk about, I don't know, like racism to all of these people and they're going to throw me out or something. I don't know. It's really terrifying. But this is where it comes back to that moment for me where so I was in this leadership program that was made up completely of people of color. And this is where I heard that line where one of the women said to me, they said, "Never be afraid of your story." And that is something that I have always been terrified of. So when it comes to not being afraid of taking up space in any shape or form, whether that's writing an article, whether that's making a speech, whether that's just giving a response to someone in conversation about something that you want to get across, it really, really comes down to not being terrified of your own power. And I think that some of the things we need to recognize is people from vulnerable cohorts, like if you have a refugee experience, you have a disability experience, you have an experience as a person of color, is that sometimes we're taught to make ourselves small enough and assimilate so that we don't make the able-bodied majority feel uncomfortable or feel different, because differences are what scare people. So the more and more you can feel safe within yourself and you can say that I know exactly what it is that I want to say. I know exactly all of the pain, all of the traumas that I have been through, and I know exactly how to communicate that safely. Then you can take up as much space as you need to. Because I really believe in the really beautiful ways that we can transform a lot of the painful things, a lot of the traumatic things that we've been through, and manifest them into beautiful things like speaking to others like this.
That's wonderful. I personally have with telling my family's story of Japanese internment because of me being white presenting. I felt as though I didn't have that right to share that story, but as I've grown more and more, and I've come to terms with, like, I am a person of mixed race and I have every right to claim that. And it's been an incredible journey, and that's still ongoing, and I'm still learning so much about the fact that I don't have to be afraid of my story, that I have the right to tell the story of my family and I owe it to them.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that you said that it's an ongoing process of learning, because it's, especially when you're like wanting to be in that advocacy space and you're really, really passionate, I think it's so easy to see other people doing amazing things and feel a lot of pressure and feel like you're not quite there in terms of your story and identity. And it's totally okay. Like right now I get to see people way younger than me who are so much more confident and so amazing doing what they're doing. So take your time. And that's when I say when you're feeling safe enough to take up space, it's so, so important, because don't put yourself, your story on the line and risk tokenism and risk harming your own mental health and your own self-care just because you think it's something that you're meant to do, because that's what tokenism does. It puts you in places where, you know, it's for the advantage of other people and not for you. So do it when you feel safe.
That's wonderful. We've got a question from Claudia Diaz-Martin. And she says, what steps practice cultural humility and grow more of an awareness of the struggles faced by different groups?
Yeah, so cultural humility is quite, I suppose, a technical term. And if you want to read about it, there are a lot of different resources that you can use. But I'll probably speak about it more generally, just so it's easier for everyone to understand. And if you want to talk about like cultural awareness, or just in general, let's call it just being respectful of someone else, is willingness to listen. Honestly, when we talk about effective engagement with other communities, when we talk about getting a message across, and this is quite common for people with disabilities as well at the moment, I feel like because of coronavirus, a lot of people are recognizing how disabled they are in their environments at the moment. And there's this really interesting conversation happening around the social model of disability and how we're all responsible for the environments that we create, and how much we're forcing other people to fit in order to make ourselves more comfortable. So the first step in that being respectful toward other cultures is recognizing that you just need to listen and that no one person has the same experience. So just like you talked about having, appearing white, but having a different identity that you feel very proud of, that's not something that easily appears to someone else. But if they take the time to listen and actually ask you, what can I do to make this a great experience for you, but not, play into stereotypes, that's really all you need to do. And I think that often people want to build these structures within their mind. They want to have all those textbook definitions in their head, and go in armed with it and be a really woke person in general. And I think it's totally okay to not know everything about someone else's culture. It's impossible. And even if you do, like, for example, I grew up here in Australia, but I am very connected to my culture, and I was born in India. That doesn't mean that all of my experiences are the same as someone who was born and raised in India. So if someone took the time to ask me what I needed, that's all that I would need in response to having a really great and inclusive experience. And it's the absolute same thing for people with disabilities. Like, don't just assume you need to have like a closed captioned event or you need to have an all sign interpreter if you're not going to actually have deaf people there, for example. Like, ask your audience, ask your members. If you're doing a group activity, just ask people what they need to make sure they can fully participate, and they'll tell you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. Like, just, it's so easy. We just want to assume that we know everything, but just being able to step away from our pride and just be able to listen to, whatever people need in that moment, I think is so, so crucial. So thank you for touching on that. Awesome. So we've got a question here from Alyssa Domingo, and she says, current mental health resources and services have a Western perspective framework. How do you think we can shape it to be more culturally specific to particular groups? Thank you.
I love this question, so thank you. And the first thing I'll say is I am all about the decolonization of healthcare systems and mental health care systems. So I really, really love that this question came up. And in terms of how we can shape it to be more culturally specific, there are a lot of different ways going on. But one of the really annoying things is that to be able to change things at a systemic level, at like a research level, from a healthcare perspective, is you need to get inside the system to fight it, right? So it means that we need to be able to have a more diverse workforce that actually represents the diversity in race and identity and an ability that your own population has. So if you've got a predominantly Western appearing white workforce and a predominantly able-bodied, able-minded workforce, then of course you're not going to have that same engagement and diversity of experiences being translated to the people that you're meant to serve. So one of the things that really needs to happen is having those workforces and a lot of opportunities that feed from young people who are perhaps studying health sciences in those fields, is to be able to make those career paths more accessible to them so that we can see all of these amazing young people who are doing all of this work right now actually be the people who are maybe one day going to be your psychologist, they're going to be your counsellor, they're going to be your youth worker. So put them in places of power and help them to do that. And as young people, what we can do is I keep going back to, honestly, is taking up space and really encouraging any organisation that you're working with to create meaningful opportunities that are backed by, unfortunately, money is needed and everything, but that are backed by funding, where they put you in spaces where you can talk directly to people in positions of power, and where you can really get that message across that you say you feel like these systems aren't serving you as someone from a different background or from a different identity. What do you need me to do as a young person to get you to do that? Ask the tough questions.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's also something we see specifically in Canada. Like, Canada is known for being such an incredibly diverse country. So one of the things we're missing is that the mental health resources and the mental health support needs to be just as diverse as the people in the country. And that's not really something we're seeing yet. So that's definitely a thing that I know a lot of the representatives are pushing and pushing for as much as they possibly can.
Absolutely. And look, I think if anything, it's the young people right now that are up and coming that are going to change everything.
Sure.
Because for me, growing up in Australia, the national youth mental health care provider here is called Headspace, and their engagement with culturally diverse, with Aboriginal populations, with disabled people is about less than 10% compared to all of the people who access those services. So it's not great to begin with. But me now being in this age category and seeing all of this work happen and being in a place to actually do all of this work, it's things are happening. So I think that we can get a little hope and a little positivity out of that.
Yeah, for sure. That's wonderful. We've got a question here. This was submitted online through Whova. If you have any tips for tackling diversity issues in religious institutions, what are some of the ways we can start breaking down the barriers that prevent inclusivity in these institutions?
Yeah, I mean, look, religion is a very complex and a very personal thing. And I personally describe myself as a very lazy Hindu. But if I think what they're referring to is about certain religious institutions either being quite predominantly one not welcoming to other identities, I think that's what they mean. The one thing I would say is religion and tackling those sorts of really large institutions are deeply personal and deeply powerful things for someone to have to take on and go through. And I think one of the really important things to remember is you're not alone and you don't have to go through that experience alone. Because when it comes to that added layer of religion, I take it quite seriously because I think it also causes people to really question their identity and their relationship with the God that they follow or the religion that they follow. And that can be quite corrosive to someone's mental health if you've always been quite spiritual and you've always been connected to your religion, and that always comes with a community. It comes with a great sense of identity because it's not just about praying to whoever you do, it's also about all of the different rituals, the different practices, the different communities that come with that. And if all of a sudden you feel like that system isn't welcoming, that system is oppressive to other groups, it's a very, very complex thing to tackle. So I think finding your allies and understanding who your allies are really important. But before taking any of those steps, being really, really sure and careful and protective about the way that you're managing that relationship is the most important thing, because you want to know that you want to understand and be able to communicate why your relationship with your religion means so much that you want that system to change and be more welcoming in whatever way that you need it to. So having that step of one, personal assurance and personal safety, and then finding your allies to be able to help you break down that system and understand where it is that you're coming from are really important tools to take with you.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Now, that is just about all the time we have for today. I want to thank you for opening up to us and sharing your story and answering all of these questions. You have been wonderful, and I know it really, really touched me. I know it touched a lot of people listening today. So a big thank you on behalf of all of us from Jack.org. But before I hand it over to you to say any last words, is there any way that our listeners can find you on social media? How would they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So follow the Vermilion Project. That's really where I do all of my professional advocacy work, I suppose. I don't know if there's a way to put it in the chat, but I will if they can. But yeah, so I founded the Vermilion Project as a way to channel all of my sort of advocacy loves and experiences, but also because I have a personal lived experience with a menstrual health condition as well. So I believe that menstrual health and mental health are quite interconnected, and I love talking about the relationship between those two things and how they're related to mental illness. So you can find and follow me there, and if you ever want to reach out and do any work, or if you have more questions, more than happy to answer them, because I love doing this and taking people with me, taking young people with me, and being able to really elevate people into those different pockets of power, into those different pockets where you can say whatever you need to, is what I'm all about and what I think everyone really should be about. And I don't believe that enough people from the South Asian community have the people to do that for them. So if that's something I can do, that's something that I would love to do.